just needing someone to help you kind of get through difficult experience, which is what a lot of stuff in the book is about. But anyway, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning of that chapter. So this is Battle Buddy. Stark doesn't like anything about basic training. He complains about it all. The early morning runs with screaming drill sergeants, the seemingly random locker searches in the middle of the night, the unforgiving Missouri heat that beats down on us on the M16 practice range. He hates the chow. He hates the low water pressure in the showers. He hates the BCGs, birth control glasses, the Army makes him wear. He complains that nobody is sending him mail, that nobody cares that he's here. When Stark's not around, we complain about him. How one day he'll get us all in trouble when one of the drill sergeants overhears his griping. I'm hanging out behind the chow hall on the loading dock with Stark and two guys from 1st Platoon, eating Hostess cupcakes left over from the lunch, and talking about recruits who have dropped out. It's early September, a month after my 18th birthday, and we're 5 weeks into the 9-week Army basic training program at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. We've just finished KP duty, and the woman who runs the mess hall said we could eat the cupcakes, but we had to hurry. We had to report back to the barracks soon, back to the drill sergeants and training, and all the camaraderie that goes with going through this hell together. Stark sits on an empty milk crate, a chocolate cupcake in one hand. He's angry because he thinks KP duty should be reserved for dropouts who quit during the first 3 weeks. Basic training is divided into 3 phases, and during the first phase, the Patriot phase, a few recruits couldn't hack it and quit. We see them in the barracks and during formation, but they don't train with us. We've heard rumors that they do odd jobs around base, painting curbs, mowing lawns, mopping hallways, KP duty. We've heard that the Army takes its time processing their paperwork, that the dropouts must wait until we graduate to go home. Stark is offended because when he was chosen for KP duty this morning, he believes the drill sergeants mistakenly thought he was one of the dropouts. I've been thinking about the dropouts a lot because I could easily have become one of them. I'm not your normal recruit. I'm not athletic, not into guns, not obsessed with warfare or strategic maneuvers or blowing shit up. During the Patriot phase, I wondered why I was even in basic training. Most of the other recruits got excited about everything, disassembling and reassembling their M16s, marching around base, taking each other down during hand-to-hand combat training. None of that excited me. So I just watched the other recruits, tried to muster excitement myself, and occasionally thought about dropping out, throwing up my hands and telling the drill sergeants that I'd had enough. Now in the second phase of basic training, the gunfighter phase, I worry about failing and having to do everything over again. If you fail the marksmanship course, or the hand grenade course, or the PT test, or any of the other checkpoints during the gunfighter phase, you don't get to paint curbs or wash dishes with the other dropouts. You must start the phase all over with a new group of recruits. I'm going to graduate, Stark says, confidently, taking the last bite of his cupcake and wiping his hands on his cargo pants, and I shouldn't be doing KP. It is hot on this loading dock in Missouri, blazingly hot, and I keep having to wipe beads of sweat onto my sleeve. I nod along to Stark's comment. If I have learned anything during the Patriot phase, it's that I need to trust the men around me. Back home, all my closest friends are women. But here, I'm surrounded by men, grunting, gun-loving, gung-ho men, like me, but not. And I've had to figure out how to survive among them. I've learned to make myself invisible, to be the shadow nobody sees. I don't raise my hand when the drill sergeants ask for volunteers. I don't take the lead during the tactical marches around base or during the obstacle course. I don't speak unless directly spoken to. Instead, I slink along the perimeter, watching, listening, trying to mimic what I see and hear. I stick closely to these men. I latch on, keep my head down, and follow along. I stand up, brush the crumbs from my uniform, wipe my mouth along my cuff. As a result of my basic training strategy of being invisible, I now think the drill sergeants perceive me as one of the dropouts too. Nothing special, not a leader, but a follower. Someone who may squeak by if he doesn't eventually drop out. And Stark, with his latest complaint, has got me thinking about how I can shake this image, How do you change the way people see you when you spend so much time manufacturing the image you want them to see? Just before Stark and I returned to our barracks, one of the guys from 1st Platoon asked us about getting smoked. I think about getting smoked a lot. To smoke someone during basic training is to punish them with physical activity. Push-ups, burpees, laps around the barracks. There are a million ways to smoke a recruit. I've heard a lot of rumors about those different ways, and I've imagined the drill sergeant sitting around thinking of new ways to smoke us. One afternoon, someone started talking about something called the pit, where drill sergeants smoke recruits in a Quonset hut filled with wood chips. When I first heard this, I imagined something like the pole barn on the farm where I grew up. I imagined steel siding and sunlight pouring in from the open door, making the dust sparkle as we kicked the wood chips around. It seemed so innocent and non-threatening. Sparkling chips of wood. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it was worse than the rumor made it seem. Have you guys been in the sweatbox yet? 1st Platoon asks. Stark and I shake our heads. Drill sergeants lock everyone inside a room, close the windows, and smoke everyone until there's a pool of sweat on the floor. 1st Platoon says, it's modeled after a torture technique. My mind skips right over the torture part, and instead, as I walk with Stark back to the barracks, I picture a sauna, steam rising from the ground, the air heavy with moisture, barefoot men in white towels. It almost sounds peaceful. I'll end there.
Thank you so much for getting us started with a little taste of what is an absolutely wonderful book. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to read this book. If you haven't, I definitely encourage you to. And there are so many things I'd like to ask you about, but since you started with, I was wondering if we were going to get to talk about Kevlock. Was that
Yes.
your crush?
Yes.
So I do have his name down here because I did want to talk about it. I guess, one of the things that really came through in that essay was this sense of, longing for connection, but also feeling like there was an inherent risk or danger in that longing. And you write in that essay about trying to kind of getting almost sort of someone noticing that you were attached to this person and immediately feeling, sort of some danger there, and then distancing yourself, but the longing not going away. And I think this is an experience a lot of queer people know well, especially, earlier in life before coming out or anything like that. But this is a theme throughout this book, this kind of dance between wanting to be known, wanting to connect, and also the fear of it, and trying to sort of distance yourself from it. So I wonder if you could talk about how you sort of came to thread these disparate essays together around this kind of dance that, at least, and I could be wrong, but I sensed kind of as a through line in the book.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I love you called it dance, because it sounds way more elegant than it actually was, right?
I was thinking gayer, but
gayer as well, yes. Because I think it was more of a clumsy stumbling into these essays and this theme, and I often talk with my husband about this kind of idea of, for me, in drafting these essays in particular, it took me so long. And I would sort of write an essay and then be like, I don't know what this is about. I'm going to change it to the different tense, right, or something, right? And to the point where it became a joke, right? And so I think it's more of, once I kind of had a number of them kind of put together and started to think, oh, this is really about this sort of idea of companionship and this idea of connection, this idea that, especially for, the communities that I'm interested in writing about in this book, the sort of queer community and that sort of idea of connection, which is, it's an idea for so many different communities, but particularly for the queer community, and particularly for veterans in the military community as well. I wanted to, figure out and address some of these feelings I was having about my own sort of reintegration and figuring things out during this time period, and how the military service kind of impacted a lot of that. So I'm going to use dance because I think dance is a lovely way to do it, but I think it was very much like, I'm just going to stumble and figure these things out, but eventually the thread itself presented itself, and I was like, oh, this kind of makes a lot of sense, and I think I wanted to sort of explore all the different ways that people do that, right? And the queer people, veterans, so many others, right?
You said that you worked on these essays for a while. First of all, they feel very natural. They don't feel overworked at all, so congratulations. That is hard to do. I'm curious, so how long did you work on this?
Probably 10 years.
Oh my gosh. How did you find the perseverance to keep going with the project? Because 10 years is a long time to work on anything, but especially something, like writing where you do have to be pretty self-directed.
Yeah.
How did you keep coming back to it?
A few things. I think, I am very thankful to have a very wonderful writing group, and some of them are here, who have sort of encouraged me and sort of gave me feedback and sort of helped me sort of figure out what was going on in a lot of these essays, and I think that is such a great, I'm very thankful that, they were a group that I found and had been with for a long time, and I think that's been very motivating and helped me sort of continue on with the project. To the point where, I think about that a lot myself, and then in making sure I sort of present that energy as well, because there are so many good writers and so many people telling stories, and how can I sort of help people, encourage people to keep telling those stories and tell more of those stories. And so the writing group was a big part of it. I think that has really been motivating. I think there were a couple blips of success where things got published, and I was like, okay, this, people do want to read stories about this, or do want to read these essays, and so I think that also sort of helped motivate stuff as well.
Yeah. So in the response to your first question, you mentioned reintegration, and that was something I definitely wanted to ask you about. You've got an essay in this book called How to Reintegrate. I love the way that you approached that essay stylistically, with the kind of numbering of steps. But one of the things I really wanted to hone in on that essay was you talked about this kind of reintegration as this, process that at a certain point often involves like compartmentalization, actually, because you describe kind of toggling between your life where you're out and you're known as queer by people, and then kind of going from there to putting on camo, as you put it, and pretending to be someone else. And that feeling of kind of disconnect and compartmentalizing being a kind of necessary step in integration, I thought was really interesting. But also how even as you get more integrated, there's still that temptation to, you talk at one point in that essay about thinking about re-enlisting after you had served, just because you felt like that would be easier. It'd be easier to go back to that than trying to go through this hard process of figuring out who you are and all of that. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit, since that is such a theme throughout the book, and in particular in that essay, this like very halting process of integration, and the kind of necessary compartmentalization that happens as a part of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think it's a big part of the military. The sort of concept of reintegration is really interesting, and that essay itself started with, I was just curious to kind of think about like, what did I receive as far as like literature or any kind of like feedback from the military or others when I was sort of coming back from Iraq and reintegrating in a sense. And I went online and just looked like, what do they provide people? There's all kinds of stuff, and there was a publication, or I don't want to say essays, maybe a loose word for it, but just sort of like list of like, here's what you can, like, here's the things that you should keep in mind as you reintegrate for a military member in particular. And I was like, oh, some of these seem really useful, some of these seem really strange, some of these seem aren't helpful at all. And so I wanted to, that essay then sort of started with like riffing on that structure of like, here's what people receive when they reintegrate from military service. How does that apply? I think it's applied in so many different ways. I was deployed twice, and so like from Kosovo, coming back from that, coming back from Iraq, but I think, I was really curious about like, what does that mean, and how can I sort of like poke and prod at that sort of feeling that is so that involves so much sort of going back and forth and sort of putting things into these compartments and sort of moving between different sort of like, maybe I'm going to be this now, maybe I want to sort of like try this on for a little bit. But I think it really started with that sort of idea of what does reintegration really mean, and how are we helping people, or how are we not helping people do that? Not only from the military standpoint, but I think some of the stuff I'm really curious about is from like the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the sort of reintegration after a lot of us closed ourselves off so much, and so connecting that to that experience as well, I think was useful for me.
Yeah, building on compartmentalization, one of the things I'm really interested in compartmentalization, and it has this stigma attached to it. The word has, I think we hear it and we immediately start thinking negative things. But one of the things I reflected a lot while working on my last book was like the necessity of compartmentalization.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to kind of, it's not as if there's sort of this one integrated true self. All of us have kind of versions of ourselves that exist in different spaces and parts of our lives where we let people in different ways, and we get to be different kind of versions of ourselves around different people. And one of my favorite essays in the book was about where you talked about Giovanni's room, James Baldwin, and that essay is about rooms that you specifically talk about that, about thinking about rooms where you've had moments of being known, of feeling seen, of exposure, and the safety of the room being a space where you can be known. I just thought it was such a beautiful essay, and that is something that I think all of us need when it comes to seeking connection, companionship. We need these intimate spaces in our lives where we can let our walls down, feel safe, where we can trust, and I just loved that essay. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one that's a great kind of connection, because it was a sort of thinking about compartmentalizing sort of our experiences and thinking about rooms. And again, it's one that came out. It came out in a couple different ways. I was writing about Giovanni's room again as like the first queer book I read, and was a sort of real awakening of, in a lot of ways, like, oh, there are people writing about queer people, and that is a thing that people do, and I can do that too. And so, but some of my favorite scenes from that book are the scenes in the room, right? And sort of the room itself, and what the room sort of entails and means to those characters was super powerful to me. And I was maybe editing the essay after I'd set it aside for a while during the pandemic, and I was like in my office, and I was like in this room, and it was like winter, and it was cold, and it felt very like isolating, and I'm like, oh, so like rooms can be super, they can have a lot of comfort and things attached to them, but they can also be very constricting. And so again, I wanted to kind of play with that, right? The sort of idea that, rooms can provide a lot of safety. We can sort of be ourselves in these sort of rooms and places, but there are times when that sort of starts to feel like it's closing in, and you need to break out of that, which I think, some of the essays in the book kind of go into that as well, getting out of those rooms and sort of sharing yourself with the world and others, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that this book is centrally about, if I can be so bold, is this kind of, again, I guess we were talking about this with the dance, but this tension between wanting that security, that safety, but also, I mean, fundamentally, this is a book about wandering too. So much of the book takes you to all these different places, and you talk in the Giovanni's room essay about, you had kind of adopted this wandering approach, but there was this part of you that wanted to be pinned down and held in place. And I think a lot of queer people have that experience. I mean, for me, like, I was like a bat out of hell. I was like, get me out of here where I'm from. I want to go to somewhere bigger. I want to be around people. I want to be able to reintroduce myself to people for, as someone new. And you talked in the book about having siblings who all stayed, and I think after I'd been away for a while, I started to recognize something you identified, which was that my siblings all stayed, my family's all here, and you talk about them all having like inside jokes and this like shared history that you're kind of absent from as the person who left, and I definitely experienced that as well. And again, that tension, I think, between wanting to wander and experience, different parts of the world and be experienced in a different way. There's a tension between that and these benefits of staying, and really getting to know. You write beautifully about getting to know your neighborhood when you bought a house and actually put some roots down somewhere. So yeah, I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, kind of, because now you're in a much more kind of root place in your life.
Yeah.
How do you still kind of nurture that desire to wander and break out of the room and all of that?
That was a very, again, sort of a lot of tension around this sort of wanting to wander, wanting to explore. And I think I spent, so many years, I think, just living in China, sort of, kind of trying to find myself in a lot of ways, and being very selfish about that. I think there's something somewhat I found very selfish about just kind of living for myself and not really caring about my family. I mean, I obviously cared about my family, but not, spending, enough time that I got away from them and sort of like wasn't spending a lot of time with them, sort of like wondering about them. And so it felt very selfish to me. And I think I had this experience of when I was living in China, traveling through Southeast Asia, and having dinner with this man who, and this is in the book, he kind of gave like fortunes, or kind of like read our auras or something, right? And sort of was able to sort of like tell us something a little bit about who we were based on very little information. And he asked like if I wanted him to do that for me, and I said, yeah, please. And he made this he made this statement that I still remember, like, you're living only for yourself. And he didn't say it in a necessarily judgmental way, but I took it in a very judgmental way. And because I had spent so much time wandering, and I was really starting to think about, like, well, who am I if I just keep wandering? If I keep wandering from place to place, I don't put down roots, I don't sort of invest in my community, who am I, right? I'm just someone who continues to wander, and maybe that's the life that I want for myself, right? And there was a time when I was considering that, and I think there was a big pull from that sort of like wanderlust and sort of desire to, I haven't put down roots yet, I'm gonna keep wandering until I figure it out. But I think eventually I did, right? And so that tension of, like wanting to be someone, wanting to put down roots, wanting to create a life with someone, right? And still wanting to explore and wander and be curious about stuff, and the tension that exists between that, because I think it's very real for me, and I think the queer experience in particular, the same experience getting away from where I grew up as a way to sort of like figure stuff out. So I think it's a very universal experience for a lot of queer people I know, and have talked about that as well. So.
Maybe tell me if this is silly, but I think for me, I had that kind of wandering period of my life, and I'm now in a place where I'm putting down roots and wanting community, and I think for me that impulse to still want to like explore, a lot of that I direct into my writing. Writing is where I can explore and try new things and be curious and all of those things, and again, I don't want to tell you what this book is, but that feels very, I really felt that in this book, this, in your writing, there's kind of this propulsiveness, this desire to explore and, explore yourself, your experiences, but also, to turn a critical eye at yourself, which you do a number of times throughout the book, in ways that are really, I think, fruitful for the reader. So I'm curious about that for you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. A lot of it went into the writing, right? So that is where I ended up channeling a lot of that sort of desire to explore and find myself. And, thankfully sort of having the page and sort of being able to put that experience down as a way to foster that sort of curiosity I still had that went with being that sort of like wandering boy who never had roots anywhere, right? Can I still do that through the writing itself? And so a lot of the essays, we're pulling at that and sort of exploring that, and again, as a super interesting sort of like, how do we still feed that desire when I also have a desire to do something else, right? And so it definitely went into the writing, and it definitely is a big part of this book as well.
I have a million more questions I want to ask you, but I also want to be mindful of time, and we've got a great audience here that I'm sure has lots of questions of their own. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. So I want to ask you a question. The last question I want to ask about is about your first essay in the book, the essay about the child your parents had before you were born, who died, and your reading of this like Carmen Sandiego themed kind of choose your own adventure style book. On a very surface level, I loved that essay because as a kid I just loved those choose your own adventure books, and I think a lot of what we've been talking about, I didn't know it at the time, but my favorite books when I was really young were choose your own adventure books because it felt like going on this journey, and I had agency and choice, and atlases because they helped me feel like I was a part of this bigger world than the like small world that I was a part of. And I really enjoyed how you presented this book and yourself, or this Carmen Sandiego book, and yourself as this kind of detective trying to kind of solve this mystery that you learned about this child your parents had had. And I guess I just wanted to hear from you a little bit more about that essay and why you chose that as the kind of opening essay, because in some ways it stands out because it isn't about your experiences in the military. It isn't about kind of post-military. It is. I absolutely see the connection, but it does feel kind of distinctive in a way. So I'm just curious about that essay.
I loved her Choose Your Own Adventure books as well. So again, my favorites were those, and Hank the Cowdog, big favorite as well.
I can't say it.
No, okay. So there were a whole series of these Choose Your Own Adventure books that were themed around Carmen Sandiego. Carmen Sandiego was, like, I played the video game when it was out, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and I loved it. And so, like, finding the books, I was like, oh, this is what I need, because I can take this home, and I have them at home now, and I've reread them, and love them. But they're wonderful because they're a mystery, right? They're choose your own adventure, but also like you're the detective. They like say that on the book. They're like, you're the detective, you get to solve these mysteries. And so the opening essay in the book uses that as a way to explore this mystery of an older sister who was stillborn that my parents never talked about. And I had a difficult time with it because, as a child, because I wanted to know more about her, right? I'm the oldest of six children, right? And so I was always led to believe, like, I'm the oldest, I'm kind of the one in charge, but there was someone before me, and I didn't know anything about that someone. And so exploring that through Carmen Sandiego was a way to do that, to sort of think about that more and to sort of ponder some of those things. And I chose it as an early essay because, the opening essay, because it wasn't military related and it wasn't sort of connected in that way to the military experience. I wanted to sort of start with just like an innocent sort of like, here's someone young sort of exploring something, using kind of their own tools that they had, which at the time was Carmen Sandiego, and sort of like I was good at Carmen Sandiego, I was good at like tracking her down on the game and the books, and so I'm like, I'm gonna use this is a great way. Ultimately, well, I don't want to spoil it in the book, but ultimately it didn't necessarily work out, but it was a way for me to do that, and I felt the essay is certainly very serious, but it was a sort of fun way for me to explore that feeling of being able to figure stuff out as a child.
Thank you for answering my questions. I would now love to turn it over to the audience. If you have a question, please just put your hand up. We'll pick folks out, and if you could try to project, and maybe you can repeat back if it's hard to hear, that would be great. And this feels like playing favorites, but I'll start with Kelly, who I've known for many years.
Okay, so I'm at North Hennepin. One of the bits of our creative writing department's lore is that you came to campus with your first book, The Day That Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, which was like a huge, very timely to share that book.
Yep.
And so now, this book is coming out in a very different moment.
Yes.
So how are you handling that? Like, how does that feel to you as this book comes into the world in such a
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, my other book, my first book came out right as Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being repealed, and it's a memoir about serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell in Iraq. So it was very timely, I feel, and so again, I feel very. I mean, I don't want to say fortunate. This is kind of a weird word, but like very. The timing was right because people were interested in talking about that at the time, and I had this story about my time in the service under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I was like, I want to talk about this. I'm so glad that I guess glad it's in the news, that it's happening, that others want to talk about it as well. So if anything, I don't know, I try to think of the books as opportunities to have conversation and connect with others. I mean, the book is about companionship and connection, so if it sort of is an opportunity to talk about some of these things, and I know there's a few people in the audience who are working on a project with me about sort of examining sort of like the military service from these sort of different realms, and sort of like and some of the news around the current state of the military and the trans folks serving in the military, and some of the things that are in the news. If this book can be a conversation to at least talk about some of those experiences in other ways, I'm thankful that it allows me to do that, but I'm thankful it allows me to connect with others and have those conversations, but still at the same time be mindful that not everyone wants to talk about some of this stuff at the same time. So I think that answered your question. Thank you, Kelly.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm
Yes.
fascinated by this idea of dropouts. I mean, my assumption, in a very layman person, did not serve, so it's like my understanding of the military is like, if you don't cut it, you're out. Like, I'm fascinated by this idea of like, they're like still there?
Yeah.
And yet, like, not.
That's strange. It's strange. I think I tried to look into some of the specifics on this, but like, yeah, I think if you dropped out like within like the first week or something, they sent you home, right? Like you clearly, if you can't, and they intentionally do that, right? At basic training, they're like, it's kind of the weed out the ones that aren't gonna be able to make it right away. But I think if you make it so far, it's almost like they've invested in you already so much. So then, like if you're gonna drop out now, you can do KP duty, you can do some of the grunt work, or like I said, when you get into like the second phase of basic training, if you can't complete something, you get sort of just like cycled into the next class, basically. I think. I mean, there's exceptions to this, but yeah, the dropouts were. I was also super interested in them as well. But that was my understanding. You still see them around. You see them at KP duty. You'd still see them in the barracks. You still see them, but they weren't doing training with us. I don't know if that has changed. It may have. Maybe a completely different system now. So.
I'm just curious, you use the language of integrating, reintegrating, moving, dancing. When you were in the military, I kept having this image of you. How did you survive that? When you're stuck? Did you have a journal that you had to hide in the mattress, or because there's such secrecy?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's
Yeah.
there's not an invitation for that to happen with oneself.
Yeah. I'm super curious about this because again, yeah, the military is very different since Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been repealed. In some ways, good for the veteran, for worse. When I was in serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, yeah, it was a very much you had to hide I had to hide a certain aspect of myself. But at the same time, I didn't. Eventually, I just was like, I think in Iraq, I was able to get like Will and Grace DVDs. Yeah, it's in the book. And I get them at the PX, and I was like, okay, and then like watch them I had a little TV in my room, in our tent, and so I'd watch them, and there are other people around, so it's like, there wasn't really any hiding it at that point. Like I was in, and like we're over here in Iraq, and what are they gonna do? Send me home? Like, go for it. Like, so eventually, I think, I got to a point where I didn't care anymore. I think but when I was deployed to Iraq, I was like 6 months away from the end of my enlistment, and I was super disgruntled and ready to leave anyway. So, but yeah, there were very much times where I had to hide a big part of that, especially early on in my service. Because it just wasn't comfortable. Didn't feel like I could be out.
You kind of talked about Don't Ask, Don't Tell protecting you in some ways,
Yeah.
though, because you could just leave those DVDs out and no one could really ask.
Yeah,
you.
what are you gonna do?
So it kind of came across as a little bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. Which, yeah, that's exactly it. It's, yeah, they couldn't ask me about it, so, yeah.
Was enlisting kind of a way to be like Carmen San Diego to get out?
Yeah, it was actually, and again, I think that's a good connection to it. There's an essay in the book about my first job after graduate school was teaching on a Navy ship as it sailed on deployment across the Pacific. Was wonderful. I loved it. I was like, why didn't I join the Navy? I should have joined the Navy instead of the Army, right? Because that would have fit better with my Carmen San Diego persona that I've been cultivating. But yes, it was in a lot of ways, and I did. It was true. I ended up, traveling, being deployed twice and going to South Korea, doing a lot of things that I don't think I would have done if it wasn't for the military. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Yeah?
Hi, Bronson.
Hi.
Hey. That's so great. I love the essay that you read. And there's a word that when I read it when I read the book, I wondered about this and I meant to look it up. And then you said it, burpees.
When you said burpees, I was like, oh.
You want to demonstrate burpees? No, I'm not going to demonstrate that.
It's like, what if we took a push-up and made it worse?
Right. Yeah, so
Okay,
it's,
that's intriguing.
it'd be like a push-up, and then you'd have to, if I remember right, you'd have to like jump up and almost like do like a jumping jack or something,
Yes.
I think, and then
Yeah, you kind of like get back up on your legs, jump up into the air,
Yeah.
get back down, do a push-up, and you just keep doing that over and over again. So
And
again,
then-
it's like a push-up, but just
Yes.
worse.
And then imagine the drill sergeant sort of yelling at you while you're doing that,
See, I
right?
haven't had that aspect.
Yeah, right. That's the added bonus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do not recommend.
Please do not recommend.
In the second edition, you'll need to add footnotes.
Right.
Explain what a burpee is for those who don't know.
Diagram.
Right.
Or you could make a TikTok to promote the book, right? I'm joking.
I'm not on TikTok.
This is the thing, like, authors are like, I'm not, I don't want to make a TikTok. Please don't make me make a
Yeah.
TikTok.
Don't make me
So,
make a TikTok.
please don't. Any other questions, thoughts? It could be about anything, including what a burpee is.
I'll throw another one out. I'm fascinated by like essay collections and in order,
Yeah.
like that sequencing. You
Yeah.
talked about the first essay. Like, did that come natural? Like after you had a chance to kind of sit back and look at them, or was that thought over and fraught?
I always conceived of it as an essay collection in a lot of ways because I was just really interested in essay as a form. I was more interested in sort of, for lack of a better word, like queer essay in particular, which was a whole sort of genre, maybe not a genre, but a whole subset of people who are writing just queer essays about the queer experience, but again, very personal essays, queering the essay in some ways, but if you think about someone like Eric Thomas, who has this book about, the title is Congratulations, the Best is Over. You read that? It's about turning 40 and sort of, the best years are gone, what do I do now? But anyway, the concept of essays, so I always imagined them as essays themselves. I think eventually they became a memoir of sorts, and memoir and essay is a sort of like subgenre of stuff as well, where people are experimenting with that as well. And I do think of it as a memoir and essays. They do have an overarching theme. I think it's all connected in the end, but initially they were thought of as just individual pieces, which is how I wrote my first book as well. I guess I kind of thought of them as individual stories about just all in Iraq, essentially. So.
This is gonna sound like name dropping, but I was literally just texting with Eric Thomas like 2 hours ago. So I will have to let him know that his name
Yes.
came up.
Yes.
It's a great book. I don't know if you've read his other works, but definitely recommend.
Both of them, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I have one last question, if there aren't any more from the audience. Yeah, please. We have two.
maybe you haven't thought about this, but you probably have. What's next, or are you already working on something else?
Yeah. So I was at AWP, the big writing conference, a couple weeks or a week and a half ago or so, and someone in the audience after a panel I was moderating talked about, basically asked the panelists who were all veterans writing about their experience, like, are you just like, what is the sort of challenge about like writing about the wartime experience, and do you feel like it's just like you're retelling the same story over and over? Which I love that question, and I love that sort of thought because, again, you know, I think about it from a queer lens too, and like the coming out story is told over and over and over, and again, I've done that myself, but yeah, I am working on something now that I'll just briefly sort of mention. Someone I served with in Iraq, who's in my first memoir and is in this book briefly, went missing in 2021, and sort of sent me on this whole spiral of that experience. It kind of it's trying to explore that, but in a lot of different ways, right? Gets into a lot about missing people in particular. So that's what I'm working on now.
There was one right back there, and then
So between your first and your second book, do you feel like anything changed about your writing process?
Yeah. Yes. It's still very messy. It's even gotten messier, I would say. I think about this too, and this kind of maybe piggybacks off the last question where I was talking about like telling the same story, because I think, you know, there are elements in here where I talk about, you know, my military experience and some of the stuff that was in my first book as well, but because I'm older now and I have different perspectives on it, it kind of has changed a lot of how I look at that, and the world has changed, and so that's a big part of it as well. And my process has, I spent a lot more time in revision. I think I dread having to sit down and do a draft, but I'm so glad when it happens, because I spent a lot of time in revising stuff over and over and over, which is part of my process and has been for a while. But the first book was a lot easier. It just kind of came out. It is what it is. I did a little bit on it after that, but this one, I spent a lot more time going over each of the different parts of it, and so that I think is a good thing. And so I'm glad my process has changed in that way.
You obviously have a lot of compartments, but you seem to be very well adjusted.
Yeah.
And you work a lot with them, suicides.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I was wondering, your thoughts about that, and
Yes.
why your personal history and all the tensions and that, is that the survival technique to survive
Yeah.
trauma before?
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways,
I'm sure there are gay soldiers that
Yes.
commit suicide.
Yes.
I suspect the vast majority are straight men that can't handle
Yeah.
the fact that they all have compartments that are without protection.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, in that the experience of being queer has sort of, I don't know, built up a sort of perseverance to sort of be able to compartmentalize stuff, which has helped me, and I think there's certainly some truth to that. And I'm, you know, not everyone has that experience or is able to sort of do that, and that is, unfortunate, and that is why, I mean, I think being able to talk about that and sort of share those experiences, I think, is important, because again, it sort of helps us talk about, you know, what's missing from so much of our culture, so much of how we support veterans in particular, and veterans who don't have the resources or have the ability to kind of put stuff into boxes and sort of be able to adjust and adapt in ways, and how can we share ways to do that and sort of get better on that. And I think that's definitely something I'm interested in and curious about, and is a big part of what I'm working on now, which is very much related to that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
any last burning questions? We do still have a couple minutes, so don't be shy. So going once. Okay. My last question for you is, please forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I believe you said in the book that you met your husband at a coffee shop.
Yes.
I wanted to know which coffee shop.
He's mortified because I read it. It's
Well, he thought he wasn't in the book at all.
we met at Nina's in St. Paul. Yeah, way back when.
That was when we first met in person.
Met in person. Sorry, not in person. We met online,
The truth comes
Right, we
out.
met online. I thought we were talking about in person.
Memoirists love to tell their own version of the story.
This is true.
Well,
One's written down. So.
yeah, exactly. Until we get Matt's memoir. Great, thank you. That was just my little curiosity. I also met my significant other at a coffee shop, so, and we did actually meet at the coffee shop, so. But the internet did help. So, yeah. All right, well, let's give it up for Bronson and the community. If you have not yet picked up a copy, please do so. Support the authors, support our wonderful hosts at Majors and Quinn. Let's thank Majors and Quinn for having us. And yeah, thanks. Have a great night.
Thank you.